From Wilmette Institute, welcome to Changing Course Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Changing Course Podcast series. I'm your host, Emily Chou. In each episode, we explore vital issues with profound implications for humanity, such as race unity, education, environmental stewardship, and social change. Through thoughtful conversation, we're joined by scholars, practitioners, and change makers who help us connect ideas to meaningful action. Wilmette Institute is an online learning community grounded in an evolving Baha'i framework for collective learning. Through our accredited certificate program, we invite learners to advance their academic and professional paths while exploring current discourses and social transformation within their fields of study. Through dynamic consultation with peers and faculty and engagement in real-world grassroots efforts, participants develop the capacity to become skilled protagonists in their careers and in their communities. So thank you for being part of this learning journey. Let's begin. So our guest today is Bob Blecher. Bob was on the podcast actually last month, and we wanted to do a follow-up conversation about his engagement in discourse with various organizations since his participation in the Wilmette Institute courses. And so welcome back, Bob. We're so glad to have you here.
It's nice to be here again.
Our topic today is going to be about engaging in public discourse through building relationships. And so, Bob, you mentioned in the last podcast some of the ways that you're currently contributing to public discourse in various ways. So maybe could you first remind us of some of the organizations you're involved with and maybe how you approached initiating engaging in discourse with those organizations?
Okay, well, I'll try to be brief. I'm involved sort of in discourse on two levels. One is sort of a more general level of, say, social change or social transformation. So it could go in a lot of directions. Maybe that's the right way of putting it. And then the other category would be, say, a more specific aspect of community building, which is just my own personal interest is in education, transforming education and approaches to education, educational pedagogy, and I guess really ultimately helping to lay the foundations for a new conceptual framework that can inform the creation of whole new educational systems. So those are the categories. And right now, I sort of made a list to myself, and I guess it's surprising when we do this, but in the social change spaces, I'm involved in currently with 5 different organizations on one level or another. And in the education spaces, I'm involved actually in 8 different spaces. So actually it sometimes it takes a little bit of juggling to sort of do this. I would say if I had to single it out, actually one of the social change discourses I've been involved with was an organization that works here on the west side of Chicago. It's called Peacebrook. And it actually was the social change organization that was part of the practical aspect of a course that I took with the Wilmette Institute on frameworks for social change. And so that's a relationship I started to build during my time taking the courses of the Wilmette Institute, and that relationship has continued and developed and expanded as well. So that's something that's very directly applicable. In terms of the education spaces, they vary tremendously, but right now I'm involved, maybe most closely involved in discourse with 2 organizations. One is it's called Weave, which is under the umbrella of the Aspen Institute, and they sort of are combating isolation through trying to build community. And I serve on a topic group they have, which is their education topic group, and we hold discussions every month. And we also host other presentations, and I'm one of the 4 or 5 people on the nucleus that plans and executes those discussions. And then I'm also involved with a very progressive Montessori organization that works with adolescent education. in the Montessori system, and I've written for their journal, and I've also helped run and facilitate a number of their forums with Montessori educators,
Mm.
and I've been involved in other ways. So it's just a little bit of a sampling. And to the last piece of your question, Emily, I would say that involvement in all of them sort of has the same root, and it is in the building of relationship. This is what I find is that my capacity to be in and sustain and build relationships really is what has allowed everything to emerge over time. And it's a whole new world for me. And I think it's very exciting.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so nice. And I love hearing your process too of thinking like about what are your interests and what organizations align with those interests and then being able to reach out and have those conversations. And then also that even if you took a course where you were talking about these things, maybe a few years ago, that you've continued the relationship with various organizations, and then those skills you've built have helped you to also continue to make new relationships and engage with more in discourse. So it's really beautiful to see how maybe an initial starting point can lead to so many more opportunities. So as you mentioned, also I wanted to ask, like we're talking about the theme of this episode of how have you found that the relationship building is central to engaging in public discourse?
Well, when I grew up, I was sort of raised what I would call, looking back, I'd call it like an achievement culture. Like
Hmm.
the idea is you want to get an A in all your classes and you want to be at the top of your class and you want to have all these awards, and it's all of those achievements that open up doors to opportunities. And what I found, I think really more organically over the course of my life is that to a large extent, that achievement type of orientation really has its limits.
Yeah.
And what I've been finding instead, it really is this orientation around relationships that really opens up not only more possibilities to contribute, but I also think more opportunities for growth. I mean, for both the growth of me as a person, but also the growth of our communities and hopefully ultimately society. So it's a really, different way of orienting a life. And I
Hmm.
think it's one that really I'm hoping that that becomes sort of something that becomes more a part of the public discourse itself.
Hmm.
If I had to say, like, what is sort of like the importance of relationship, like how um, relationship is central, I would say that it's through the building of relationship that people feel a sense of safety. It's through the building of relationship that people come to feel a sense of trust. It's through the building of relationship that people gain sort of an ease with being
Hmm.
more open and receptive to each other. And I think all of those things really affect the quality of the discourse that takes place. I
Hmm.
mean, because so much of the discourse is in conversation, so much of the relationship is about the quality of that conversation. And what I have found is that as I have developed, to the extent I have developed, we're all a work in process, it is that the real value of this to contributing to public discourse is that it moves relationships from just a sense of connection, right, to a mutual pursuit of growth and
Yeah.
progress. And I think this is really important. I think most people think of relationship in terms of, I just want to be accepted. I want to be validated for who I am. I want to be heard.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important, but relationships really become meaningful in a sort of a portal into discourse when people trust, right, and feel safe enough, and there's openness and receptivity where both people begin learning from each other.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think, and that learning really proceeds the most when the conversation is sort of accompanied by service together.
Mm.
So I really believe that this building of relationship is something that can move from connection, which is really foundational, to this mutual learning and this mutual growth that allows for the discourse, right, to really grow. And to me, that's why it's so central. It becomes central to the learning process itself that allows for growth.
Yeah, very true. I'm curious also if you had any um, maybe a particular experience where you felt like you really did connect or build relationships with an organization or an individual when you were communicating?
Well, there's so many, it's not always easy to sort of figure, say, one of them out. But I will say that recently in one of the social action groups that I was involved with is we hold what's called community meals, and there's 5 different organizations that are involved in bringing people to these community meals, and they're all about promoting a discourse around what it means to build community and then engage in more and more collective action around the building of community. And I've been engaged in a number of reflection meetings on our last meal. And yesterday I sat with somebody who I think of him as someone who's extremely knowledgeable about technology,
Mm,
but he wanted to talk with me about and we have a relationship and it's built, but he wanted to talk with me about the opportunities that exist within this environment for the inclusion of the arts as a form of growth.
mm,
And he's very interested in how technology can be employed and used in ways that could not only include the arts, right, but see the arts as integral to like our own personal growth, the development of connection between people, right? And also for social progress. I was just very surprised to hear all of this. And we talked for 3 hours. It was incredible. We only left because I had to get on to another meeting. Otherwise, it could have lasted forever. But I took all these notes and it was fascinating because of how much I learned
mm,
from engaging in that reflection with them. And so it's not like, oh, here I am. I'm here to sort of offer all of my knowledge I've gained. What
yeah.
I find is that through these relationships, is I'm learning a lot more than anything else. And I'm learning from people who I never knew I'd learn from, and I'm learning things I never would know that I would be learning. And so this is just a really positive, it's just one example. It just happened to happen yesterday, but these kinds of things are happening all the time.
It's so true. It's very different than maybe like you would say, maybe if you're doing research in a field and you're going with a sense of interviewing and you're accumulating the information from the person, or you're either that way, or you're saying, well, now I have this information, now I can teach or I can share on to someone different things. It's a very different way of engaging with people in discourse than that is building relationships and just knowing each other and then having more to contribute and want to talk for 3 hours about any topic that comes up. That's the more of the purpose of all these things.
Well, what's also interesting about that is that by the time we ended the meeting, it was immediately like, well, what could we do together to forward
Mhm.
this? Like there was this real like heartfelt inspiration, right, on the side of his name is Andrew, to
Mhm.
say, how can I contribute to this process? So I told him about the next step that we're taking, which really was holding a Zoom meeting among people who attended the last community meal
Mhm.
around the concept of building relationships. And then he asked if he could help to co-facilitate that with me. And he's never participated, but he was inspired to participate. So growing out of this mutual learning is this desire to serve and to be involved in processes of social change. So
Yeah.
to me, that also is something that's very encouraging and very inspiring.
Hmm. Yeah, to see that it's not just also a conversation, that the conversation leads to meaningful action and
Right.
change together. So I'm also curious, in what ways have you been able to maybe it sounds like you've already kind of shared a few things, and people maybe are even coming to you and asking you questions about what you think and having these conversations. But kind of what ways have you been able to contribute ideas maybe from the courses or from things you've learned to these organizations in a meaningful way? And what kind of attitudes or things allowed you to be able to do that?
It's really a wonderful and important question to ask because it raises sort of like what is the role of knowledge in contributing to discourses or into social action? And I want to say that over and over again, I tend to rely on elements of the framework for learning, which is at the core of all of the courses of the Wilmette
Mhm,
Institute. And I can think of maybe two ways that sort of within public discourse is like these elements of the framework become relevant to the conversation in very like natural and organic ways. So, for example, is to the extent that I have built a relationship with well, an individual or a group of people is that once people feel open, right? Once people feel safe, once there is this sense of trust, once everybody is learning from each other, is everybody sort of feels open to share like authentic concerns they have.
mhm,
And and one common concern, of course, is the state of the world today. The state of society is moving in a, a disintegrative sort of direction where things seem to be falling apart, at least among the established institutions of society.
mhm,
And so that comes up, and what I find is that I'm able to contribute, or shall we say, offer sort of a perspective that's based upon the Baha'i framework for learning
mhm,
that is at the core of the Wilmette Institute. There is one element which essentially places the process of social transformation within this very broad context of humanity's movement toward its collective maturity.
mhm,
And I think once I'm able to sort of offer that perspective, when we pull back a little bit, it helps people to raise their level of understanding of what's going on. And they're
mhm,
not so much caught in the minutia of, say, what maybe happened in the White House yesterday,
mhm,
right? Or what's going on in the world in Iran,
mhm,
last week or last month, things like that. And they are able to see that even disintegration is serving an important purpose
mhm,
in the world today when it comes to progress. And I think that the more we can help people see things within a larger context,
mhm,
is the easier it is for people to say not be negatively affected by it, but I think more and more it allows them to actually approach the future with a sense of hope.
mhm,
And I think that's really important today because unless we feel like there is a possibility for a better future, it's hard to take action.
mhm,
The other thing that comes up is like, on the one level is people in relationships are sharing authentic concerns, but they're also sharing their hopes. And what I find is that in all of the groups I'm involved with, it's amazing how shared that hope is. We're
mhm,
living in a world which is incredibly divided, increasingly polarized, sort of in a state of paralysis in some ways. But what everyone understands and seems to understand is that in order for a society to move up forward, in order for our lives to move forward, is there has to be a sense of unity.
mhm,
And people understand this building of connection between people is really fundamental to that progress. Now, within that space of sharing those hopes, then one element of the framework, what does a mature society look like? It looks like a society that has, in the terms of the framework, sort of like translated the oneness of humanity into reality. And this principle of the oneness of humanity then really fits into this process and is a very, very powerful force because the way I understand the framework for learning is that the oneness of humanity is not this like utopian ideal.
mhm,
The oneness of humanity is actually a truth. It's a reality that exists.
mhm.
And I think this is really important on a number of levels because once people are proceeding with their life and their involvement in the community in ways that is based upon this understanding of oneness as reality, not as an ideal or an
Mhm.
aspiration, but as reality itself, it strengthens their conviction in what they're doing. It strengthens their commitment to what they're doing. And I think it's a lot easier to remain sort of steadfast or, you know what I'm saying, in the face of difficulties, in the face of obstacles, because processes of social change, you know, whatever character they take, we're going to encounter a tremendous amount of difficulties, a lot of tests, a lot of trials. And what I find is that people who think that unity is some utopian ideal is when they face these difficulties, they just stop and move on to something else.
Mm,
But that when we really have this underlying conviction that this is what is reality, right? Is that in that sense, is that those people, they then work through those difficulties. They were willing to work individually and collectively through those tests and those trials, right? In order that real progress can take place. And I think this makes all the difference. You
mhm,
know, so instead of thinking the concept of the oneness of humanity as a reality, instead of thinking sort of this is an utopian ideal that I wish would someday happen, right, into a reality, is that then the work becomes more about aligning our lives and helping to align, you know, our communities and the institutions of society in their operation with the reality which is actually true, which is unity. This unity and diversity that we understand as the oneness of humanity. So
mhm,
it's a very powerful concept. I really feel like to the extent I'm able to live this in my life, right, is that I really feel like I'm sort of like my life becomes more and more an expression of what real justice is supposed to look like.
mhm.
So it's a very powerful idea. And and these things arise naturally once relationships are built where
Mhm,
people are willing to share authentic concerns and their real hopes, right, for their
mhm,
own lives, for their families, for their communities. So I don't know, it really is beautiful.
mhm. Yeah, and it sounds like you're mentioning, like each of these concepts or ideas that you're sharing on one level can be seen just as like a superficial thing of just unity and everyone should be unified versus how you're kind of talking about it in such a deep way that can actually influence motivation and action and how people are working together and how they can work through challenges as of course like you mentioned everywhere in social where we're trying to make social change happen, there's going to be challenges. And so it's really nice to hear how even a seemingly simple concept can have such profound implications in the operations of an organization or how people feel they can continue to contribute to how they're changing society.
It does.
Yeah. Um, so I'm really grateful you're able to share so many valuable insights. And before you go, I know last time you're also able to share maybe a few actionable steps for the listeners, but now I'm curious, maybe more related to how we're building relationships and engaging in public discourse. Are there any actionable steps that you feel like the learners could take from what you've learned in this area?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I have that much more to add than what I've already shared, to be honest. But for me, I have to say is that whatever progress I've made in my life, and I think in terms of contributing in some small way to the transformation of society, comes with knowledge. And I think that this is really important. And
Mm,
that's one reason I honestly believe that the work that the Wilmette Institute is doing is so valuable. And I know of no other institution of formal education that's even trying to do, much less doing, what the Wilmette Institute has started. And so I really appreciate that because the kind of knowledge which relates to the transformation of society is really the kind of knowledge which is the most meaningful today.
Mhm.
So I think that's really important. And all I could say is that through my involvement in the courses of the Wilmette Institute, is that my understanding of the concepts which underlie social change has
Mhm.
really been elevated and very much clarified in ways that
Mhm.
allow me to take action on them. And I think that the practical component, most school, of course, has no real practical component. It's just an intellectual study. It stops with the taking of a test, right?
Mhm.
Um, but the Wilmette Institute, most of the emphasis is on the actual practical application of the learning
Mhm.
in conversations we're having around social change. And so as a result is like there's so much possibility to build real practical capacity to engage in these relationship building activities that allow for our growth and also allow for the progress of our communities. So I'm really grateful for the fact that there is no dichotomy within the Wilmette Institute between theory and practice. They're very integrated.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, I feel like I really appreciate all you've shared about how, of course, the Wilmette Institute helps you initiate this process, but also how you've continued to contribute in all these meaningful ways and continue to build on, like you mentioned, the practical component of engaging in discourse and contributing in these ways. It really helped me also understand what public discourse can be, either like a small thing with like a couple people having a conversation or in the United Nations having a conversation, but there's so many avenues that public discourse can take place and that it can meaningfully contribute to actionable steps taken and service and transformation happening in communities. So really appreciate your time and we'll see everyone on the next episode.
Well, I appreciate being here. Thank you so much, Emily.
Stay inspired. Until next time.